everyone. Welcome to the May 12th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and we are looking ahead to some weekend racing. The focus of our podcast this week is going to be Churchill Downs on Saturday as we handicap their late pick 5 sequence there, races 7 through 11. The feature race on this Churchill Saturday card is the William Walker Stakes, going the 5.5 furlong distance on the turf for the 3-year-olds, and nice to have turf back in the mix at Churchill. I know we handicapped a few sequences at Churchill on this podcast last year, and all dirt racing with them having trouble getting use out of that new turf course, but it seems like a lot of those issues have been resolved at this point, so they'll be using the course much more frequently at this meet, and we do have a couple turf races in this sequence. Nice variety of distances, conditions, and not an easy sequence to handicap, Craig. Some large fields in the mix, and not too many clear-cut favorites.
No, for sure. It's a good sequence. I know I mentioned to you offline we had storms in the OKC Metro last night, so I didn't get a chance to handicap it too strongly last night, but I did look at the sequence and quickly realized I was going to have to get up very early this morning to get the work done, and I did that. And yeah, it's a good sequence. I haven't put a pick 5 ticket together and don't even know if I will because it's very difficult, but I found some of these races interesting for sure. Some long shots I like, some favorites I don't like, and a good sequence. And I'm glad you mentioned the turf because I haven't watched it Derby week. It looked like it's in really good condition.
Yeah, it looked like it was in good condition, and most importantly, it looked pretty fair, which I know was an issue when they first got on the turf at this time last year, and then subsequent issues prompted a lot of races to be taken off the turf. So hopefully all of that's behind us at Churchill Downs. And we're actually going to start this sequence off with a turf race going the 1 3/8 distance. This is an allowance event for the 3-year-old and up runners around the 3 turns of the Churchill turf course. N1X affair is the allowance condition, and we've got a 12-horse field signed on with some also eligible entrants, so very likely to go with a full field here. I will mention that I was checking the weather forecast. There are some possible storms in the Louisville area for Saturday, a little bit on Friday, a little bit on Saturday. There's not a lot of rainfall predicted in total, so hopefully these races stay on the turf, but I just do want to mention that weather situation in case there are any issues with these races staying on. But Craig, this is one of the more difficult races in the sequence as we begin things. I think the horse to beat has to be considered the number 12, Foreign Relations, and this is a horse that might be triggering for some people because there was an incident in his last race that caused him to be disqualified, and he was the instigator of a very unfortunate incident that resulted in a horse having to be euthanized, the one that he interfered with and unfortunately went down in that race. Can't watch the replay for that reason, but I think a lot of people saw it live when it happened, and immediately after, in the aftermath, when the clip was posted on social media. Foreign Relations was an easy winner that day, crossing the line far ahead of his competition, clearly relishing the return to turf and the stretch out to the 1.5-mile distance. Again, he's not going quite as far here, but another marathon distance, so he's the one to beat as he looks to officially clear this N1X condition here, but drew a difficult post, switching from Flavien Prat to Julien Leparoux. Some people might view that as a negative, so I don't know how short a price I want to take on this horse.
Yeah, that's my thoughts exactly. He's one of the horses that I'm probably going to try to beat. I'll definitely try to beat him playing verticals because all the reasons you mentioned. For one, I think people are just going to assume that he will easily be able to clear this condition since it looked like he won so easily last time. But I think those changes are important. Look, Julien Leparoux, he's a decent jockey, but he's not Flavien Prat. I think that one's better. So in my eyes, it's definitely a downgrade here. The post is a problem, and I just don't think he's one that I would want to lean on too heavily.
No, I agree with that, and I could see his price dipping down a little bit from that 7-2 morning line. The reality of the horse, though, is that he's run very well in both turf starts. He's only been on it twice. Once was his career debut back when he was a 3-year-old, going 1.25 miles, a very demanding distance for a first-time starter, and he closed well to be second that day at 61-1. After that, just ran on synthetic and finally got back on turf last time and took a big step forward. So it's possible he's just a much better turf horse, and I think he's legitimate, just not sure he's going to offer value in this race. And there might be some others that are more enticing prices. Where were you looking to go in here, Craig? Because there are some others that are listed at single digits on the morning line that I wasn't the most thrilled with a horse like the number 9 Jarreau, who's had a lot of chances for the Mike Maker barn. Definitely a horse that can run well here, but just doesn't find the winner's circle that often. So I wanted to look for some others if I was going to be searching for alternatives in this race.
Yeah, I started with a couple of the inside horses. The one horse trending, I think he's fine. He had shown some promise as a 3-year-old on turf, particularly he got later in the season in the early summer before he laid off. I think that last race is a toss out. Not the last race, his first race off that long layoff was a toss. He obviously did no running after pressing the pace, but I actually liked what I saw on synthetic. He showed that the mile and a half wouldn't be the worst distance for him. He improved quite a bit for Shug McGahee, and I'm actually expecting an even better race this time. So he's one I think is dangerous. And the horse just to his outside, the 2 F5 is a horse who has decent early speed. I think that's always important in these races. We have him shown in basically co-second, and that would be fine. That the 5 horse who's shown on a clear lead is the front runner, but not really a horse I think is much of a shot. And I could see a horse like F5 just tracking in the pocket, getting a good trip. And he seems like a horse who, even though he lost last time, he was still finishing strong. You can see his ascending pace figure to speed figure line in Timeform US. And he's one that I think, given that tactical speed, it's often dangerous in these longer races. And I think he can handle it. So those two were the first two that jumped out at me.
Yeah, both of those are interesting horses. Personally, I don't see any way how F5 is 10 to 1 in this race. I think he's going to take a lot more money than that, potentially be the second choice. I mean, he just ran too well on the turf last time for him to get ignored in here, and lightly raced horses like this, they often have upside. So, I mean, I just think he makes a lot of sense in here. I wouldn't say that I'm sure he's going to like a marathon distance. I mean, he was going a mile and an eighth last time. He's got to stretch out an extra 2 furlongs here. He's by not this time. The pedigree, it's not like it's screaming longer. So I wasn't sure about that, and he got such a favorable trip in that race, setting a slow pace, all those blue color-coded fractions. And the horse that beat him, Dripping Gold, is a good horse, and he battled back gamely, like you said, at the end of the race, but it was so much dominated towards the front end that I wonder if that effort's a little bit dressed up. Assuming that he's going to get bet down a little bit, I wanted to take a slightly negative view on F5. I could be a little more positive on trending because, like you said, off the layoff, 2 back, probably not going to get his best effort that day. He did take a step forward on the synthetic last time. Now he's 3rd off the layoff for Shug, so typically going to get the better effort this time, especially from an old school trainer like Shug, who can tend to race them into fitness at times. And he showed some hints of ability last year, so I think trending, especially drawing the inside, is one that you might want to consider in this race, and getting Louis Saez aboard definitely not a hindrance to his chances in here. But circling back to that race that F5 was second in, I wanted to look at some horses that maybe were compromised by the slow pace that day. And one that really stuck out to me that I think is going to be a much better price. And I have to imagine that the number 11 policy option is going to drift up off that 8 to 1, whereas F5 goes down. I can't imagine that he's a shorter price than F5. But policy option just really had no chance in that Dripping Gold race, which was 2 back in his past performances, just taken to the back of the pack early, left with way too much to do, and was actually really finishing at the end through traffic, but could not make up the ground. Came back in another allowance race at Keeneland just a couple weeks later, and I thought ran much better. Similar speed figure on the TimeformUS scale, but again, he was putting in a big late run, only going a mile, and I think a mile is very much on the short side for policy option. He's never gone quite this far before, but he's run well in a few mile and a quarter races over the Tapeta at Turfway, closing really well a couple times in those spots. So I think that the distance of a mile and 3/8 is really going to work for him, and he just doesn't have that sexy look about him. I mean, he's only 3 for 35 lifetime with a bunch of seconds and thirds, so some people might hold that against him, but I think he's subtly in very good form right now. The distance will work, and if he is drifting up, or I think 8 to 1 is fair, what he is on the morning line, but I think we might get higher than that. So he's one that I'm very interested in this race.
Yeah, the only thing that scared me about him was the 3 for 35, but I agree with what you said. He was on the list of horses I wanted to use. There was only one more I would add, and that's the 6 Bold Looker, who comes out of the Foreign Relations DQ race. I don't think he ran all that great, but his speed figures fit in here. The distance shouldn't be a problem. So in a race where I think some of the horses are going to have problems with the distance, I don't think he's one of them, and he's going to be a big price. So I want to have him on my ticket, particularly if I'm playing verticals. The other horse I wanted to bring up was the eight, always above, just because he's a short price, only 6 to 1 on the morning line. He's a horse I don't want anything to do with. I'm not sure that's a good morning line. I think that would make this horse like the co-third choice in here, and I think there's a bunch of 6 to 1s, but he's just not a horse I'd be interested in, and I really don't see him taking that kind of money.
Yeah, I agree. He probably isn't going to take that much money. I think that the 1, 2, and 12 are going to take all a little bit more money than it seems on the line. Maybe the 9 as well, Giroux. But getting away from that nitpicking, I agree about how the 8 could be bet. I'm a little more positive on his chances than you sound, though, Craig. I mean, he was off the layoff last time, and I get he didn't run well in that farm relations race, but he's got plenty of prior speed figures on the turf that would give him a chance here. I mean, and he faced some really good horses last year in that Colonial Cup. I mean, running against Red Knight, another mystery, and snap decision, the jump horse. I mean, what chance did he have in that race? And then they tried the Dueling Grounds Derby, and he actually won a 1 3/8 race over this Churchill turf course, maybe a slightly different profile for the turf course last year, but did win going this distance last year with a big late run. So I wonder if he just needed that race coming off the layoff, and maybe we'll see a better effort here. And if he does drift up off that 6 to 1 morning line, I could definitely get interested in him. So I was kind of leaning in that direction, using the 11 prominently. With the 12, obviously, I think Foreign Relations is very much the horse to beat, and maybe some of my backups would be horses like Trending and Always Above.
Yeah, a horse we didn't mention, and I'm kind of torn on. I wanted to get your opinion. Was the 10 Bosque Redondo? I guess is how you say it. And I mean, his maiden win was good at Tampa, going a 1 3/8. Ran a speed figure that would make him competitive in here, but he does change from the Chad Brown barn to Alexis Clare, who's kind of a new trainer. Not a whole lot of stats. She only had 90 starts in the past year, but she certainly has won at a good percentage. Seems to be very competent, to say the least. So that's a horse I also don't want to totally dismiss.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of the trainer switch. Sometimes these horses do get a little bit ignored leaving the Chad Brown barn, and it's not like there's an owner switch here. They just, I guess, have given the horse to a different trainer. I don't know if Chad Brown's going to have a Churchill Downs string this meet. I just don't like his races that much, so I can't be too positive on him. I didn't like the field quality at Tampa Bay Downs when he won last time. He had to work pretty hard for that victory. I just think some others have faced much better competition than he has, so I'd need a big price on him if I was going to get interested, and I don't know what it's going to be. So I was more interested in some others. Move on to the next race in this sequence. Race 8. It is a $75,000 claiming race with the non-winners of 2 lifetime condition attached. This one is going the 1 mile distance on the dirt, and we've got plenty of class droppers in this race, Craig. A real dearth of early speed, which I think we do have to talk about. A lot of closers in this race that are actually turning back from 2-turn races, so I don't know how much speed any of them are going to have going the 1 mile, and the clear early leader on the pace projector in a situation favoring the front runner is the number 7, Triple Elvis. And I'll turn it over to you because I wanted to make a case for this horse and I couldn't quite get there, but maybe you have a more positive outlook on him.
No, I think the only real thing you could give him is that he's going to be alone on the front end. And I think that's pretty clear, assuming he gets out of the gate. But there's obviously some big questions regarding the distance. He only tried the 1 mile at Aqueduct, was on the pace, dropped anchor pretty much in the stretch, and it's not like he was a huge long shot that day. He's okay, but I'm in the same boat as you. I had a hard time just making him a top pick. I mean, if he drifted up and was 20 to 1 as they're loading into the gate, sure, I'd probably put a few bucks on him. But I think the distance is a bigger question than what the early speed provides as an advantage. I think which the horse I had to start with is the one horse Single Ruler. And I mean, you have to kind of look at his running lines. He hasn't shown a ton of speed, but when you see the horses he was in against, particularly the last 2 races, I think there's some very real excuses, and not that he even needed an excuse in the Risen Star. He ran fine. I mean, it was Angel of Empire, and they're the horse who just ran third in the Kentucky Derby and a very good third. He was 5 lengths behind him. We've talked about on our show the Louisiana Derby many times, where horses just didn't have much chance. It was a race. It was a fake race. There was no pace. I say fake, and it just was not a legitimate pace at all. So I think you can basically excuse all the horses out of there, and it's not like. He was very, he was a huge price that day. I'm not sure he was even asked to do much running, particularly when they got to the stretch and was obviously he wasn't going to be able to keep up. So this is just a very logical drop in class. And to me, he's clearly the horse to beat.
It's a logical drop for single ruler. I agree. He's faced much better fields. I think that's pretty obvious. I wish he had done more running in those races. I thought he was just kind of picking up the pieces at the end of the Risen Star, never really involved there. And then the Louisiana Derby, they actually did the right thing, trying to keep him closer to the pace early, but despite having good position at the top of the stretch, he just went backwards as opposed to forwards. So, clearly he wasn't of that class, and like you said, he's getting that significant class relief here. I still don't know quite what to make of him. They had entered him in one of the last few races on Derby Day, I think like the 13th race on Derby Day in N1X allowance, and Keith DeSormo decided to scratch him from that spot and instead go in the $75,000 claimer, albeit that was a really tough spot that he was entered in. But still, I wonder if they're just kind of acknowledging that maybe this is a horse that got good for a while and now he's going in the wrong direction, and they're not going to be too upset to part with him if they do. So I was kind of two minds about single ruler and didn't want to take too short a price on him. Brendan Walsh has a couple of runners in this race that I think both have to be taken seriously. The number 3 Crump and the number 5 Tepeyu, who are actually the two favorites on the morning line. They competed in a race back in the middle of April, an allowance event at Keeneland, where they both took some money, but they were just no match for some better horses like Barber Road and Principe d'Oro. Tepeyu's performance was a real disaster. He just dropped out around the far turn and had no answer. Crump was taken a little further back in the early stages and was sort of putting in a belated run at the very end. So at least Crump showed some signs of life there. Tepeyu, I think, has a lot of questions to answer now, second off the layoff. But on their best days, both of these horses could be tough in here.
Yeah, of those, I much prefer Crump. I watched the replay of Tepeyu a few times. There's just nothing to see, and I think there's also some negative signs with him as well. He came back first time as a gelding, didn't run at all. They're immediately dropping him in for a tag, so I took a more negative view of him. Of the two, I would much prefer Crump, and even single roller for that matter. And I kind of have similar thoughts with Costa Terra, the 6. It's another Steve Asmussen horse who is probably going to take some money in here, and he's just a horse that I don't want any parts of. He has no early speed in a race that basically has no speed other than Triple Elvis, and I think he's going to take some money on the drop given the connections, and he's yet another one I want to toss out in here. So that's why I said I couldn't totally toss Triple Elvis, because I don't love the others in here, but for me the two most likely are Single Ruler, who I think is the horse to beat, and Crump.
Yeah, we're going to go in different directions in this race, which I like. We have just having differences of opinion. I like Costa Terra in this race, actually. It was a little difficult and triggering for me to watch that last replay because I had been alive to outlier the 50-1 shot of the pick 5 that day, but that's a story for another day. Costa Terra, though, I thought he ran okay in that race. He was sort of always on the rail and trying to sneak through inside at the very end, the race where the winner charged down the center of the track, but he was right there with some pretty good horses, and his race 2 back, the reason that I had thought Costa Terra was interesting in that last allowance race was he was so much against the pace 2 backs, a blue color-coded situation. And something that really intrigues me about him is that I like him turning back to one turn. This is a horse that I've kind of had interest in for a little while now, but I've always had sort of in the back of my mind, does he really want to go this far, or is 2 turns too much for him? And I know it's the same distance, but these one-turn races can play differently. This is a horse that I thought ran really well in his 2 one-turn races to start off his career and kind of never progressed after that, but I really like him getting back to the one turn here. And I think he might be able to stay a little closer than it looks based on the form and the pace projector. Unless Triple Elvis goes on some mission to really string out the field in the early stages, which is often not how these riders ride in a lone speed situation. They try to back it down so much, which I often don't think helps their cause that much. I think that this field is going to be fairly compact early, so maybe he's not going to have to make up as much ground as it looks on the pace projector, and I think Costa Terra is very interesting in here. And one more horse that I want to throw a mention to that I think is going to be a big price, probably going to drift up from that 8-1 morning line, is the number 2, 7 Flat, who maybe looks a little cheap. He's one of the few horses that is actually moving up in class in this race, but this just feels like a horse that might be moving in the right direction. He had started to put things together before going to the sidelines in the summer last year, and then he came back off the layoff at Keeneland last time. 6 furlongs just feels like it's too short for him, but he was really hitting his best stride at the very end of that race, and that felt like a prep. I think we're going to see a better effort this time, and I don't know if some of these horses that have back class are going to show up at their best efforts. Some of them might be on the downswing. He feels like one that might actually be set up to take a step forward in here, and is going to be a big price. So I wanted to get a little more creative in this race and highlight some horses like 7 Flat and Costa Terra that I could, that I could use and maybe at better prices create some value in this race.
Yeah, and for me, if I'm just playing this race vertically, I'm probably not playing because the horses I like are short prices. I couldn't get there on the longer prices. So really, it's a race I would just try to get through if I played a pick 5.
Let's move on to the 9th race, still on the dirt course, sprinting. This is a 6 furlong event. Go for the fillies and mares, optional claiming 80,000, non-winners of 2 other than the allowance condition. Another large field signed on, 12 runners in the mix. And, Craig, this is one that, I was somewhat familiar with some of these horses. I know we talked about a few races they're coming out of on our Pacecast. I think we actually handicapped one of the days that these horses ran. So some interesting things going on here. I think we do have to talk about the race won by Tarabi that a lot of these horses are coming out of. You're So Silly was second in that race. Ironic Twist was third. This is one that I know I emailed you about. I kind of had a disagreement that the race could possibly have been so fast. It was a difficult day to make speed figures, I know. I think it was that Lexington day when it felt like the track had changed multiple times. And this was a race that, on the clock, came back very slow. I know we broke it out to get the high speed figure for Tarabi, who had run some big speed figures in the past. I don't know if the number makes sense to me for everybody else in the race aside from the winner, and I'm a little skeptical of horses like You're So Silly and Ironic Twist being able to run that number back.
Yeah, I can see that, and unfortunately, it's been almost a month, and we haven't had any run backs that I've seen, at least that have unless they were in the last day, they should be in the chart. So I don't think we've had any. I'm kind of torn on it because as I look, most of the horses ran similar figures of what they've been running in the past, outside of Ironic Twist, which is kind of how we came up with the number. But I have no problem with your skepticism. I mean, that's why we note it with the B and say, hey, let's keep an eye on that. And I also run a report every week with the B races, at least until they're a couple months old, to just kind of go back and check on them and see if there's any obvious ones that were mistakes. And that one we haven't had the chance yet because there's no run backs. The one thing that I think is definite from that race is the pace was extremely fast, and we get a couple of the same horses in here, particularly the leader, Top Gun Girl, who was a horse that I wanted no parts of that day. She was coming in as one of the top figure horses, I believe, with that 113, but it was in a 5 furlong race, and I once again hold similar reservations. I don't want any parts of her again. I think this is too far and too tough of a group, but the one thing you have to keep in mind is she is going to make life difficult on any other horse that wants a win on or near the front end.
And she's probably the reason that Ironic Twist lost last time, because I don't think there's much argument that Ironic Twist ran the best race that day. I mean, she was the one that was dueling with Top Gun Girl early, put the speed away, and just got run down by a couple of horses that had gotten better trips. I mean, Tarabi, who had come from mid-pack, and You're So Silly, who's back in this race, who also made that run from a stalking position. So I think Ironic Twist is definitely a horse to consider in here. I don't like the rider switch from Flavien Prat to Joe Talamo. That's just, to me, a pretty obvious downgrade. And I also have those reservations about whether she's going to be able to repeat that number. But, I mean, if you take it at face value, I think Ironic Twist is the horse to beat.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. I just wonder what kind of trip she's going to be able to work out because it seems like she's going to be pretty close. Now she does draw a far outside post here in a big field, so maybe she could just rate off of it. But it's one of those. It just kind of depends where the odds are going to go. If she drifted up off that 5-1, which to me seems pretty unlikely, then I'd get more interested. But I suspect she's going to be a lower price, so I want to look in a couple different directions, mostly at horses who are probably going to come from more off the pace.
And I should point out that Ironic Twist isn't a horse that necessarily has to be contesting the pace. She's actually shown farther back on the pace projector than You're So Silly, which would be surprising based on their last race. But Ironic Twist has been a stalker in other starts, and I think the fact that she drew more inside last time might have forced the hand of Flavien Prat a little bit, so maybe we'll see her come from farther off the pace here. I guess we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. One more horse that I want to mention out of that Tarabi race that I just have to give another chance to at a gigantic price is the number 7, My Kentucky Girl. I had mentioned her as one to consider last time, based on the fact that she had run really well on the dirt last year at Keeneland in a dirt sprint, making a big late run to win with a nice speed figure, had run poorly after that, but seemed to wake up a little bit on the synth 2 back, getting off to a poor start. Unfortunately, she got off to another poor start last time, so that's becoming a pattern. But after that, I just didn't like the ride. Chris Landeros just, I don't know if he gave up on her or if she was getting out or what was going on, but he just didn't look like he was able to ride her at the back of the pack, and then he stuck her inside at the top of the stretch, altered course, but after it was too late. I think there's ability here, enough ability to compete in a race like this, and I can't ignore those last 2 workouts that are showing up at the Churchill Training Center, where she's thrown in a couple of very fast bullet workouts. So clearly, there's intention here for her to show a little more speed, you would think, and she has possessed it at different times in the past. So I think that My Kentucky Girl is going to run much better here, and she's getting a rider upgrade to Ricardo Santana. So there are things I like about her at a big price. She's definitely one that I want to include, but she is a horse that's going to need a lot to go right.
Yeah, I kind of was holding off on my pick because I wanted to give you the chance to use that one because I remembered it from last time. She's going to be my top pick in here for all the reasons that you mentioned. She has to get out of the gate, which maybe it's becoming a problem, but at 20-1 or higher, I'm going to take that chance because I think things are going to get hot up front. I do really like those 2 workouts. I think she's going to be closing, and why not? She's the kind of horse that I bet in races like this. She has the best TimeformUS late pace rating by a pretty good margin in here. So she just seems like a one. I also like the rider upgrade as well. So in a race that I think is going to fall apart, I think it's a good one to take a swing at a big price. And I'll be keying her in verticals without a doubt.
There are 2 more horses that I want to mention that I would use pretty strongly in this race because I've already kind of put it out there that I'm somewhat against some of the short prices from that Tarabi race. So, who else do I want to use aside from My Kentucky Girl? I think the number 6 Portilla just makes a lot of sense. She's run very well at Churchill in the past. She's coming off a little bit of a layoff, but when we last saw her, I thought that she ran a nice race at Oaklawn for Al Stall. And I know that she looks a little light on speed figures compared to some others, but if you draw a line to that Tarabi race, this field just looks pretty similar, running those TimeformUS speed figures in the low 100s. And I think Portilla just fits really well, and she's got the kind of versatile running style that should allow her to work out the right kind of trip from mid-pack in here. So I'm definitely using her. And then one more horse that I think is very interesting is the number 1, Well Spent, who just seems to be placed very ambitiously off the layoff, and I like to take note of these situations when sharp connections place their horses ambitiously like this, because she clearly got into good form last year when she was picked up by 10 Strike Racing and Bentley Combs for $32,000, and they got their money back immediately when they won that handicap at Saratoga in her next start. So, they're good. They're even on this horse. They're positive on this horse. And, they could have brought this runner back in a $25,000 claimer or a $30,000 claimer. But the fact that they're not, and then they're instead targeting this really tough spot off the layoff, suggests to me that maybe she's just really doing well, and they have a good reason to get ambitious with her. If you look up the stats, Bentley Combs does really well training horses for 10 Strike Racing. So this is one that I think is going to get somewhat ignored on the tote board, and a horse I definitely want to use.
Yeah, for sure. I have no problems with that one. And when I first saw it and I saw the claim one race and the big layoff, I kind of viewed it as a negative. But the more I looked at it, it's not like they're bringing her back for less. They're bringing her back in a big allowance race, and yeah, I can see that no problem at all. The other horse that I wanted to mention was the 10 horse, Moofy, I guess you say, for Jonathan Thomas, and this is a horse that I don't want to completely dismiss either. Speed figure wise, maybe she looks a little light, but this will be her first time racing as a 4-year old. Been away over a year, gets a good outside post. And I think you got to look at those speed figures and think if she's ready to roll, she's going to run faster than what we saw in spring of her 3-year-old year. So she's one, if she's anywhere near that morning line, I want to give a long look to as well.
Yeah, I was surprised to see the 12-1 morning line on her, just given her form. I feel like she's got to go lower than that. I mean, if she's 12-1, it's probably a bad sign for a horse like her, especially for a barn like Jonathan Thomas that typically gets bet when they're live. Jonathan Thomas has great layoff stats overall. On the dirt, the numbers completely fall apart. He's very good off layoffs on turf. On the dirt, it's a completely different story. Just doesn't have success. So I'm skeptical of this one for that reason. And I also think when you start to dig through that last field that she faced, I know that some horses have done good things much later, like Olivia Darling and Carabin Dorada turned out to be good horses afterwards, the latter on the turf, but they were not good horses at the time that Moofy ran against them. And I think she might be a little overrated in this spot. Move on to the stakes portion of this sequence, race 10. It is the William Walker, like I said at the start, this one 5.5 furlong turf sprint for the 3-year-olds. And this is a race that I like as a trip handicapper, Craig, because everyone's basically coming out of the same race. We've got an 8-horse field, and 6 of them last ran in the Palisades at Keeneland, so it really cuts down on the replay watching. Gaslight Dancer was the winner that day, causing a minor upset at 6-1. And I thought he ran fairly well. He got a good trip from Tyler Gaffalione, but I thought was a commanding winner of that race. And he seems like he's coming in as a legitimate favorite, though I think there are some other things going on in here and some other horses I want to highlight. But I just wanted to kind of state that I'm not against Gaslight Dancer.
Yeah, I watched hoping I would be against Gaslight Dancer, and I really couldn't come up with anything. I mean, its trip was fine. It wasn't like he, sat on the rail and snuck up of the inside to win by a nose. I thought he ran very well in his first start as a 3-year-old, so I didn't really have any knocks on him. The way I really attacked this race is I kind of started out with the horses that I want to be against and see if I could change my mind. And the first one was Noni Hudson. I know he's 6-1 on the morning line. We'll see if that's what happens. He's a Wesley Ward. He's going to be speed. So I think he may take a little more money than that, but maybe not because I don't really want any parts of him. I didn't see any excuse for him last time. Just didn't think he ran particularly well, packed it in. And really, he hasn't been that good. He's a horse who won his first start at Keeneland as a 2-year-old. They didn't got a little ambitious with him. He's running nothing but stakes races ever since. But I've just never thought he was all that good. So he seems more like an allowance horse, so I don't want any parts of him. The one who's going to take more money is the 7 Private Creed. He was a horse I actually liked in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint, and he ran fine that day, running behind, I think it was a couple Europeans, if memory serves. But I just haven't been as impressed with him this year, and I think people are maybe going to make excuses for him. Well, when I go back, for example, to that race at Sam Houston, where he was the favorite, got beat ahead, the horse that beat him that day has done absolutely nothing since. And I can put a line through his race in the Risen Star, obviously. They tried dirt, I guess, hoping to see if maybe he'd be a dirt horse. But last time in that Gaslight Dancer race, it says he was bumped at the start. I watched. I didn't see anything to really cause any problems to me, and it looked like he got a fine trip. Maybe you saw it differently. I'm interested to hear what you think, but I just didn't find a big excuse for him. So my big leans in this race are I'm not using the 5 and the 7.
Yeah, I mean, we agree pretty much on Private Creed. He's a horse that kind of, mystifyingly to me, always takes money. I don't get it. I just have never liked any of his races that much, including last time. He was a little wide, and I think he wanted to be saving ground in that Palisade. So, I mean, maybe you give him an excuse for that reason. But, I mean, the race was falling apart at the end, and he just kind of picked up pieces to be 5th. So I don't get him. I do want to be more interested than you are in the number 5, Noni Hudson, and I guess we'll see what price he is, but looking at the way that Palisades played out, I think the pace really took its toll on the horses that were contesting it, and he was dueling earlier, actually chasing a very fast horse named Bushido, who showed a lot of early speed, and Noni Hudson went after that horse, and Bushido actually faded really badly to finish far behind Noni Hudson, and that race just completely fell apart at the end, and I think it really worked in the favor of some other horses that are coming in here, like Two of a Kind, who was second, and Chiringo, who was third, and Noni Hudson, I mean, he did get very tired at the end of that race, but I thought he had a right to, just given the trip that he got. And also, unlike everybody else who had success in that race, he was never on the rail, always chasing outside. So I thought he ran a lot better than the result indicates. And I can't say that I loved any of Noni Hudson's 2-year-old races, but that last effort, I think, is going to make people underrate him a little bit. So he's definitely one that I want to use in here. And furthermore, Craig, I want to talk about this pace situation because the pace projector is showing 2 horses ahead of him in the early stages, and I don't see how either one is going to get ahead of Noni Hudson. I mean, the one Gilcrease, who I think we're probably going to talk more about in just a second, he's not really a speed, he's more of a stalking type. And Two of a Kind, yes, he had speed on the dirt before, but he ran as a closer last time in that turf sprint, and you can't imagine they're going to mess with what worked, so they're probably going to, especially with Julian Leparoux aboard, they're probably going to wrangle him off the pace again. And doesn't it just feel, as you look through this race, like maybe Noni Hudson's going to get loose here?
Yeah, he could. That is the one, as somebody who doesn't care for him, that's the one danger, I think. I totally agree with you about Two of a Kind. Hopefully that's something we can build into the pace projector. I would much rather just use the turf race in this example, but that's not the way it's set up right now. I agree with you. I don't see him on the front, particularly with this rider. It was the first time he rode him. He took him back near the backs, not a surprise, and he ran fine. But I would have a hard time thinking he's going to beat a Gaslight Dancer off that effort. He really didn't have a reason not to last time. As for the inside horse, I tend to agree with you. I think he's more of a tracker. I actually like him quite a bit in here. He would be my top pick. I don't think we're getting 15-1 on him. I don't even know who makes the morning line at Churchill, but I found a lot of these kind of shaky in my opinion. But he won his debut on turf in a decent race at Saratoga, ran a good figure as a early season 2-year-old just in August. They've tried him on dirt a couple times this year. He's ran fine. I mean, he's ran better speed figures than he did on turf, but I just like the action I saw of him at Saratoga. I like that he gets an inside post that's going to save ground here, something Corey Lannery likes to do anyway, and I think this horse is going to be a real threat in the stretch.
No, I mean, I've got to inject a little bit of reality into the line here. I feel like Gilcrease is going to be like 4-1. 9-2. And I think he's supposed to be that price, Craig. I mean, he just makes a ton of sense in this race. And often when you have these horses that are huge misses on the morning line, I mean, they tend to take even more money than they were going to in the first place, because people, get so excited about this 15-1 shot, and then they stick with the horse despite the fact that it gets bet down more. So yeah, you're not getting anything close to that on this horse. He just makes a lot of sense. And, like you said, for all the reasons you mentioned, I mean, his turf race was good. And even though he's improved his speed figures on the dirt, when I watch those races, he's just finishing like a turf horse. He gets there and then just can't really push off that final eighth of a mile. And typically those are the horses that need to go back to turf. He faced some really good horses in those last 2 races, and I just think he's got a good trip coming to him. He's got that tactical speed. I don't know if he's the most likely winner, because that's probably Gaslight Dancer, but he's close to it. And I just think he's a horse that I definitely need to lean on in this race. So Gilcrease, Gaslight Dancer, and Noni Hudson are the ones that I'm most interested in. Crispy Cat didn't run that badly in the Palisades. I mean, if I'm going to upgrade Noni Hudson, I've got to at least give Crispy Cat a look. The difference is he was on the rail, whereas Noni Hudson was off the rail. I don't think you wanted to be off the rail in that race. So that's why I'm kind of upgrading Noni Hudson more than I am Crispy Cat, even though it looks like they have pretty similar running lines.
Yeah, I agree with you totally on Crispy Cat. It's hard for me. Some of these, it's just hard to see him getting past Gaslight Dancer because they had similar trips and he was the clear winner. And don't get me wrong, I was trying to make the case, not as explicitly as you. No way Gilcrease is going to be 15-1. And I just like to bring that up because the people listening, I don't want them to think we have illusions that we're getting $30 on that horse if he wins because it's clearly not going to happen. But I also think he's a contender, and I think he would be value if you're able to get maybe not 4-1. If you got 5 or 6-1, I think that would be more than fair.
Yeah, maybe 4-1's being a little aggressive, but I've just seen it too often, Craig, when these horses are such big prices on the line, and then suddenly they go off like they're much shorter prices than you're expecting them to. Like I'm thinking of that situation. I think you might have been on vacation that week when I had Michael on, but when we talked about that Elkhorn at Keeneland with Howe Street, that Jorge Abreu horse who was 10-1 on the morning line, which Nick does the best job that he can at Keeneland, but that horse just had all the hallmarks of one that was going to get bet down, and I thought maybe he could be 9-2. He went off as the 2-1 favorite. I mean, it's just, these horses, they just go overboard on them sometimes when the line seems like it's too enticing. So we'll see what price Gilcrease goes off at.
Yeah, that's a good point that sometimes it seems like a runaway train and these horses, and people think it's smart money, and maybe in the end it's just chasing. Everybody sees a horse getting bet down off that morning line and thinks it's more smart money when in reality it's just where the horse should be in the first place.
Let's move on to the last leg of this sequence. It's a kind of a rare condition, a $100,000 tag maiden claiming race. 6 furlongs is the distance for the 3-year-old and up horses. So you're getting a lot of maiden special weight to maiden claiming moves in this race, Craig, but I wouldn't say it's that typical maiden special to maiden claiming drop down because a lot of these horses are not getting the kind of class relief that you usually think of when you look up that stat.
No, I mean, it's not a huge difference from a maiden special weight. I was going to see offline if you wanted to go half seas on one of these. No, I'm just kidding. When I saw that claimant price, we've done some maiden claimers at Oaklawn and Golden Gate that had nowhere near this level of horse. I think there's some decent runners in this field, and hopefully it wasn't just me getting lazy because it was getting toward the end of the sequence and I had talked some, but there's a horse I really like in here, so I'll just jump right to it. And if you're looking at TimeformUS PPs, it won't be a surprise. It's a number 7, Magnificent Mike. He's a horse who ran a 107 TimeformUS speed figure in defeat. If you have the weight setting turned on, it even shows up as a 108. And he did it at Horseshoe, Indianapolis. Seems like kind of a circuit where you wouldn't expect that. The purses aren't as good, but it just seemed like a race that came up with 2 really good horses. They gapped all the way back to the third. I think it was almost 10 lengths back to third. But when I look through that chart and I look through the day at Indianapolis, just everything at that figure points to it being legitimate. All the horses who have come out of that race have run similar or better speed figures. A couple of them, one of them ran yesterday, ran a good second. Even the last place finisher came back to win, albeit in a big drop to a maiden claimer. But to me, this just has the hallmarks of a race that was a lot stronger than it looks. And I'm thinking it may be overlooked because of that Indiana running line.
Yeah, Craig, I agree with you. This horse is very interesting. And, I kind of like you were saying, I went into this race, saw that speed figure, looked it up, expecting to just tear it apart because it looks like a total outlier in this horse's past performances. But in that race on the day, it looks legitimate. And then I start to dissect this horse's form more. And, maybe he's just a dirt horse because his prior dirt races had come when he was a 2-year-old and most of them were going 2 turns. And I think it's become kind of clear that this horse probably doesn't want to go 2 turns. And in a couple of those races, he faced horses like Rocket Can and Tappett's Conquest last year, stakes level horses. So, as you start to take the form apart, it makes a little more sense that this horse might have that kind of performance in him. And he seems like he's spotted appropriately. They're not getting too ambitious, going for a maiden special weight on this circuit. So I think Magnificent Mile just does make a lot of sense in here. The horse that I don't like, that I think is the favorite on the morning line, is the number 12, Patton's War, going out for the Brad Cox barn, and I expect he's going to take that kind of money, going out for Brad Cox. His debut was okay. I really did not like his last race, Craig. I mean, he got a pretty good trip in there, was right in the mix at the top of the stretch, and just went backwards. And I actually much prefer the other horse coming out of that race at Oaklawn, the number one, Speaking of the Devil. This is a horse that did not have much early speed when he debuted last year, made big runs from off the pace twice in a row, ran out of ground, came off the layoff at Oaklawn with blinkers added, and suddenly had a totally different running style, much more aggressive. Ran into Federal Judge, who I know we talked about on the Pacecast last week, is a horse that's stakes bound very soon. He tried to duel Federal Judge to back off the layoff, and so no surprise that he faded that day. And then he came back last time, and I mean, yeah, he hung in the late stages. It looked like he might have had that race won at the 8th pole. But again, he was second off the layoff, and sometimes you see the best effort out of these horses when they're third off the layoff, and he's running in, I think, what is an appropriate spot here. So if I had to say who the most likely winner is, I would say it's Speaking of the Devil, much preferring him to the horse that's drawn on the other side of the starting gate, the number 12 Patton's War.
Yeah, I think we agree in this race. I much prefer Speaking of the Devil. If I was going to use a second horse, if I played a pick five, it would be him. And I may very well use those two in exotics, Magnificent Mike and Speaking of the Devil, because I just think those two are pretty much way above the field in here, including Patton's War. I have all the same reservations as you. I'm not sure why he was made the morning line favorite over Speaking of the Devil, other than I assume just the Brad Cox factor at Churchill Downs, because I haven't liked what I saw from him. So for me, it would be those two only in a pick five, leaning on Magnificent Mike or Magnificent Mile. I'm not sure where I kept getting Mike from. Guess I was thinking of the Magic Mike movies. Anyway, Magnificent Mile, he's a horse that, yes, I'm going to be playing for sure and leaning on in both verticals. And if I were to play horizontals, that one as well.
Yeah, and we were kind of on the same page here, Craig. I was trying to simplify this race as well, and maybe we're falling into the trap of just trying to do that in the last race. But I kept looking at other horses in here and just not being able to quite get there. I mean, a little and a lot, the number 9. I know has two appealing looking second place finishes in both career starts. I thought he was supposed to win last time. That was a weak race at Fairgrounds, and he just couldn't get the job done at a short price. And, the number 11, Lupo's Legacy, another one that I was trying to build a case for. I haven't loved either start since he left the Jeremiah Engelhardt barn. I know this current trainer wins at a high rate, but just doesn't feel like a horse that has that much upside, and he's a 4-year-old in a field facing primarily 3-year-olds. So I just couldn't quite get there in a lot of others, and the two that we really highlighted, the 1 and 7, they just look like they make a lot of sense in this spot.
Yeah, and the only other one I considered was Lundberg, who would actually cross the wire easily in front last time at Oaklawn for a $50,000 tag, but he was disqualified, rightfully so, I think. But he just doesn't seem fast enough. So yeah, for me, and it's often the case in maiden races, particularly maiden claimers, where contention just doesn't run as deep as it does in some other races. So I have no problem leaning on just two.
Well, Craig, you mentioned at the top that you hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about pick 5 ticket construction for this sequence, and I don't blame you. I mean, it's a tough sequence to handicap just race by race in and of itself, and putting a ticket together seems like it's going to be a tough task. I think that based on our opinions, there are some spots where we could narrow things down a little bit, like in that last race, and maybe for you even in that stakes race. So do you have maybe a clearer picture, or is this just not a sequence that you're that interested in playing?
Yeah, I would have to spend more time. I mean, I can kind of go through the horses I like real quick. In that first leg, the mile and 3/8 on turf, I was giving the 2 inside horses a look, and the 11 you like policy option. You kind of swayed me a little bit. I was lukewarm on him because of the 3 for 35. I think it was lifetime record, but I think there's some excuses there. So, yeah, I could do that, and he should be able to get the distance. The 8th race for me was one I wouldn't play vertically because the horses I think are most likely to win are Single Ruler and Crump, who are going to be bad. I'm not as high on Tepiu at all, the other Brendan Walsh horse. So it's just not a race I would get interested in. We mentioned Triple Elvis. If somehow he wound up being a big price, maybe I could play him lightly as one who could steal it, but the distance concern is real for me. In the ninth, that's a race I'm very interested in verticals because it's a race I think is going to fall apart. I know you were my Kentucky girl fan, and I just think with those two workouts, I think they're really focused on getting this horse out of the gate, and I think she could run well. And I also was interested in Moofy, the 10 horse. Probably won't get anywhere near that 12-1, but I think she really fits in here. In the stake, I really like Gilcrease, the one horse. Fully knowing I'm not getting 15-1, I still think he's probably going to offer value. Should get a good trip from the inside. And then in the last race, the maiden race, like I said, just two for me. But the horse I'm most interested in, I won't be surprised at all if, speaking of, the Devil wins. But I don't think he's going to offer the same value as Magnificent Mile, who I think really is going to have some hidden form and might get overlooked a little bit.
Yeah, as I go through this, I mean, there are definitely some difficult spots, but I kind of found myself making decisions as we go through each leg, and I think that I can take stands in a few of these races and make it into a playable sequence. Like in that first leg, race 7, I'm really leaning towards those outside horses, the number 11 Policy Option and the number 12 Foreign Relations, who I don't know if he's adding value to the sequence, but I just think he's a likely winner of the race. And the others that I want to use in there are the number 1 Trending and the number 8 Always Above. And I kind of would want to let a lot of others beat me in there, especially some that could take money. And that's one of the legs that I actually want to spread in the most. In that 8th race, I just had trouble latching on to a lot of horses. And I think that for me, the value is going to be on the number 6, Costa Terra, who I think is as likely to win this race as anybody, and the number 2, 7 Flat, who isn't nearly as likely to win as my other horse, but I just think is going to get very overlooked in this spot, and I have a positive take on him. So I would lean towards those two and maybe try to go thinner in this race than people might expect, because it looks wide open on paper, and I just have kind of negative takes on a lot of horses that could take money. In the 9th race, again, I would spread a little more here using the 1 Well Spent, the 6 Portilla, the 7 My Kentucky Girl, and then I'd have to use somewhere the 5 You're So Silly and the number 12 Ironic Twist, even though I have got those reservations about the speed figures. I mean, they obviously both ran well last time and are contenders in this race. And then I would try to narrow things down again a little bit more in the William Walker. I like Gilcrease. I also like the 5 Noni Hudson, who would be my price horse in the race. I think he's very interesting. And not that I'm against Gaslight Dancer, just feel like off that perfect trip last time, maybe he gets a little bit overbet. I mean, I could use him, but he's definitely not a horse that I want to lean on in this race. I'd rather press horses like the 1 and the 5. And then in that last leg, we're kind of in agreement. Speaking of the Devil and Magnificent Mile, just make a lot of sense. And it feels like the kind of race where people might be tempted to spread. And if we can narrow down a little bit, just especially those two, maybe that's where the edge is.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to mention going through these races is after the Derby, normally Churchill kind of drops off the radar a little bit, other than I think the Foster that's run? The Foster that's run in June. But man, when you take a look at these purses they're offering, I have a feeling we're going to see some pretty darn good competition for the rest of the meet, and some horses shipping out in the summer that are going to have to be dealt with, because I think we're going to see just better overall racing quality at Churchill than we have in the past, and it's getting better all the time.
Yep, we've seen that happening in Kentucky for, I think, the past few years, and I think we're seeing the culmination of it right now with just a real uptick in quality. And as you said, it really does stem from those huge purse funds, but a lot of trainers are trying to take it, and owners are trying to take advantage right now. So we're seeing some competitive racing at Churchill Downs, and I think that's very apparent when you handicap this sequence on Saturday. So hopefully we gave out some good ideas here, Craig, and we'll recap some of these races, I'm sure, when we do the Pacecast. Actually, let me alter that statement. We probably won't be doing much of a recap next week on the Pacecast, because already upon us somehow is Preakness Week coming up next week, and I think Craig and I are going to go back to our Derby schedule that we did, just putting out one podcast next week that will be focused on the Preakness. So given that it's a slower week in racing, I think we're not going to miss the recap too much. So I think we'll just put out the one podcast next week, and Craig and I will also be doing some other Preakness content and stakes previews around that. So it's not like you're going to miss us too much. Everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on drf.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch our TimeformUS podcast coming out covering the Preakness next week.